Welcome to Dirty Living Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Meese, and today I've got Geordie Stewart from Connect Tools with us. Geordie's been an icon in the hammer hydraulic breaker industry for years, and I'm just excited to hear his story. Geordie, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, man, it feels like the introduction being an icon in the hammer world still feels odd, but I'll take it from you, so I appreciate it.
If you're not an icon in the hammer world, I don't know who would be, so... Anyway, I've known Geordie for a long time and just has a really cool story and background. And Geordie, if you'll tell us just how you got started, the history of your experience in the industry, and just walk us through that story would be great.
Yeah, so originally born and raised in Georgia, lived there till I was 30. And coming out of college, I thought I wanted to be a lawyer, which sales is like the easier version of lawyers, I feel like. But I looked at an LSAT prep book for Christmas, and I looked at a couple of the questions and I closed it. I'm like, I'm not going to be your lawyer. So I decided to go the teaching route, teacher. And so I went back to school in college for probably another 3 years, taking 9 hours of master's courses to become a teacher, which was a great time. But yeah, I taught in Georgia for 5 years, and not kudos to anybody who's a teacher out there in any school system, but I just felt like I just didn't appreciate the everybody wins aspect because it's not real life. Went and sold after for a year during the recession, and selling voluntary insurance during a recession definitely helps get your sales feet under you. So what I was basically doing is working at Red Lobster while I paid to go around and do lunch and learns at a doctor's office of 2 people. And then my dad had asked me several times if I wanted to come work in the hammer business. And then you work at Red Lobster for a year as an adult trying to sell Aflac insurance, and all of a sudden you're like, I'll try it. Whatever it is, I'll try it. That was 2011 when I finally made the move, and my dad was working for another company that he'd worked for 10 years. I'm looking up like, what are pistons, what are bushings, how do hydraulics work? My first show, like probably 3 weeks into it, was Con Expo. So coming from a teaching world to like just the mass amount of money that's Con Expo blew my mind. And just what I really wanted to do when I first started was I went up and like just sat through a rebuild, and I actually rode with my service guy at the time for 6-7 weeks, just doing rebuild trainings and watching and listening and hearing things. And that's how I learned it. And from there, I worked in the Southeast for a little while. My dad passed away 8-9 months into me working with him. He covered the South Central. The company I was with was awesome and let me like, hey, do you want your territory or your dad's territory? And I knew that the goal was always like for me to work with my dad's customers. So yeah, I jumped into his territory, and it's a really good coping mechanism. I don't talk about emotions a lot, but it was just good to be around people that he worked with day in, day out, and hearing constant stories. And so basically my job was not to screw it up. And I just worked really hard and traveled my tail off and try to meet and get in front of as many people. There's so much value in selling in person. And then I finally realized there's one of my dad's friends' names was David Spainout, and he owned a company, mid demolition, here in Dallas, and he asked if I'd be interested in buying it. And just the taxes were done right for a business owner, and it wasn't something that I could probably get financing for. So I just decided to talk to my wife and ask her like, hey, do you want to go open a rebuild facility in Dallas, Fort Worth area? I know him named Johnny Gibbon.
And you guys lived in Florida at the time, right?
2 miles from the beach.
Yeah.
There's nothing that a wife wants to hear more like, hey, baby, like I know we're at the beach, but you've always talked to me about wanting to own a hammer rebuild facility, and I'm here to let you know that dreams do come true. So
the opportunities in Cleburne, Texas.
Yeah, and Cleburne, it's up and coming now after they got dial-up internet a couple years back. But no, it's a great little industrial town. It's at the bottom of a new tollway. So I wanted to stick to the south side of the city just because the north side was so packed out. And yeah, being in the industry for 3-4 years, buying a warehouse, basically on the phone with Johnny every day. Hey, what tools do you need? Okay, I'll go buy it. Okay, I'll go buy it. Like my goal was like, it was a 3-man band. It was my wife who was angry for the first couple years because her job was to sit up.
What did I sign up for?
Like take the two, and she was angry because there was nothing to do really. I mean, she was doing the books. I'm not an organizer, and so she did payroll for 3 people once every 2 weeks. So after those 3 buttons were clicked, like her job was to wait for the 1 or 2 phone calls we might get each week on the phones, and yeah, just go for there. We took possession of the building in that October, and then just me and Johnny and Haley did everything from stain the floors, put the racks up. Johnny installed the air system. Like we took a box building and made it into a pseudo shop. And then 2016 was quite the magical year, election year. I think it was the real beginning of just crazy elections, floods,
Yeah.
oil pipeline cutting off. I think my sales went down like 40%. You know, your typical scared about making payroll business owner story. Like, I think what you and I met in 2016.
So I think I was trying to think. I think it was earlier than that because I remember when you were still in Florida when we first met. And that's what that process was probably funner for me than it is for you because you're my friend and I'm just like, hoorah, I see you going out and doing your thing and it's exciting and building that facility out there and all of that. So I think it was probably, I want to say it was in that probably 2014, mid to late 2014. And then because I do. I remember that transition that you guys were going through and
Haley and I did the road show at the time when I would come visit.
yeah.
Yeah. So
Right.
it just to make my wife's dreams come even more true, we got married October 4th, 2014. Everybody says 10-4, so every time somebody says true. And yeah, so we got married, sold our house in Florida, rented a house in Texas, and decided to go on a road trip. So she and our dog KD put about 60,000 miles down that year, just visiting customers. It was like a functional family road trip. But yeah, everywhere we went, she'd come in with, and I think there's a value to people knowing the people behind you because my dad always said, include the wives, no matter what you do, include the wives, because they're really the ones that make the biggest sacrifices with what we all do in this industry, time away from home, the long hours. So it was interesting. It was good. But yeah, I remember meeting you in that first phone call and you were looking at the specs. And somebody's looking at the specs. This could be really awesome. So I remember the phone call quite well. And I always joked that like in 17, when things turned around, you sold that first big hammer to a quarry in Arkansas that literally helped us make a payroll by the time I got paid for it. Because I think at that time, me and Haley had about $1,500 between the two of us on a Wednesday, and payroll was on Friday. So, yeah,
Wow.
I remember that a lot. I don't know if you knew that or not.
Man, so I remember, and not to highlight that too much, but I remember us going down. We were in Arkansas. We went out and we were trying to figure out where to go thing. And we were talking about it. And you were like, can we go? And I was like, man, I was like, I'm like thinking about it. I'm like, he just started a business. They're out on the road. I bet things are tight. And I'm like, man, I love the story of that because it really is. You guys, I want to back up a little bit. So your dad was in the industry for years. I never had the pleasure of meeting him, but I certainly have heard his reputation and a lot of your customer base. Obviously, we know and have interacted with and just speak very highly of him. Do you feel like that obviously created a huge fuel for you in that industry when during that time taking over that territory? I know you said that's a coping mechanism, but I feel, man, I haven't seen very many vendors in the industry that were just as aggressive or attacking the world that they were manufacturing, that they were representing the way that you did. And that always really stood out to me. Do you think part of that was just really, that had to be a huge motivation for you when you were taking that over and obviously wanting to do well with it? Do you think that fueled not only just that customer base, but your drive in that industry as well? Or do you think you just took to the industry? Maybe it was in the blood.
I'd say it's 15% industry, 85% drive. Part of it, I was remember I was 1099 through my dad. So I got paid and then he paid me. So I was like his employee. And I remember my first commission check I got from him, which As a teacher, my take home was $1,700 a month. Um, so once I got that first commission check, and it was a pipeline deal, it was 4, 5, 12,000 pound hammers. So it wasn't terrible. I was like, whatever the hell this job is, I cannot swim. I'm going to protect this thing with my life. And I feel like from then, and it's all, I knew my dad wanted me to do it, and he wouldn't have asked me to do it if he didn't think I could do it. And I remember asking, look, Dad, I'm like, man, you've worked for 2 hammer manufacturers. He used to work for Monroe Tractor up in the Watertown, New York location. I remember visiting him. He owned his own little private rental house in Noonan, Georgia. I remember driving a Mini X when I was 3. He'd go take me chopped milk and sausage biscuit. And I'm like, look, you've done all this. Even when you got divorced from my mom, you were down and out living on my brother's couch in California doing hands-on demolition after the earthquake in 89 or 88. I was like, I don't have the experience that you have. You just got to call people back. I was like, it's not easy. And it's not. That is 75% of it. It's wild how much ways there are to communicate, yet how many people don't get back to people. That's my only job, is to
Right.
phone and tell you what I've learned.
Right.
And so from there, like, he had set up quite a robust territory with some good dealers. So I just had a lot of seeing people to do. And there's a couple things he always told me was like, don't send a text, don't send an email. Pick that phone up and call him. Give him the good news, give him the bad news, but talk to him in person. And I like the in-person visits, and that makes a difference. People just want to know that they're cared about.
Right.
So yeah, like, that was a big driving force. You know, there's a couple ways it can go when you take over a business or a business situation from your father. You can either, frankly, piss the money away and pretend like you're working, but you just go out and play. Or so many people that I work with now, like, even thinking of dealerships or rental houses that I work with, like, when the son takes over, he works so hard to get out from under that shadow. It makes him even that much better. That's what your parents want, is for you to be better than they are. And I can't ever say, because my dad had a very calm temperament. As I get older, I'm working on that. But I can't ever say that I'll be as good as my dad, but it was definitely a driving factor to just not let down his story, because everybody said, you got some big shoes to fill. And I remember talking to the vice president of one of the big rental companies that's one of our customers. He's, this is yours to screw up. He's like, we're going to give you a chance. You better not hope to ever hear from me. And I did. I was like, oh, okay. So no, it was a huge driving factor in wanting to do good. I just fell in love with the industry. I mean, we deal with, it's a difficult job. It's not I drive around to see my friends. That's what it is. I make some cold calls along the way, but we all become friends. It's what people do, and you work with people that are like you. So that was the other driving factor.
Right.
The harder you work, the more people know you take care of you, and yeah, you just make really good friends along the way.
Absolutely. There's a lot of really great people in this industry, and it's really cool to talk back to what you said about your legacy with your dad. That I feel like there's 2 directions people go with that when it's family, just in general, or they're taking something over or working for family. And you and I have talked about this before. There's some people that they'll take that opportunity and make it not about the family at all. I'm not here because it was gifted to me. I've earned this, right? I'm going to earn this. It's not just going to be this thing that was handed down to me and I get to float the ride that was already built, right? I've got to improve the ride. I've got to make it bigger, better, faster. And certainly, again, I never had the opportunity to meet your dad, and I regret that, but I can't imagine. I know for certain you've taken that approach, that you certainly strive daily to make it better and bigger. And I know that I'm sure that if we were to poll all those customers, they would say the same thing. So let's move forward. So we got through your rebuild facility and that support, which was an amazing asset to me personally. And I know a lot of other people in the industry, that kind of became a hub of support for a lot of people. And that dream certainly, I feel like, manifested. And you really answered what I would say was an industry need down there for sure, and supported us in a great way. But tell me, so then let's talk about that transition and then over to Connect and Exodus Global. Tell me just how that transition happened. I remember us working together on a pretty large project. I know you recall this as well. And one of my customers had brought up the Connect name, and it was their mechanic, right? And anytime a technician tells me a product's good, I'm like, we better listen to that. And I remember talking to you about it. And I had bought one from a guy that was actually my original sales trainer 20 years ago. And he had worked for Connect for a period of time, and it performed great. It was a very tough environment. You guys were largely supporting that out of Cleburne. And I just remember calling you and be like, man, this is pretty good stuff. And I can always tell with you when I'm telling something you already knew, right? Like you get this, oh yeah, and then it wasn't much later that.
Not that you weren't going to be like, hey, like you like it when you have relationships with customers that are opening up to call them back, hey, look, this is a great deal. We're gonna buy one of these hammers. I just wanted to let you know. And like that year, you bought 12, 14 reconditioned 12,000-pound hammers from me. So you can't get greedy in this industry. And that, like the feedback you got from that was in 2019. The feedback you got from that hammer, it kind of resonated with me, but where it really caught my eye is Exodus Global. So Exodus Global basically was started by Bruce Bacon after he had left Genesis, and they started making material handlers, got in bed with Cat, realized, hey, this isn't for both of us. They got a bigger building out of it. Cat got what they needed to get out of the deal, and everybody moved away, and they went back to making shears. I remember in 2017 Con Expo, our booth space wasn't exactly advantageous. It was in the central hall, but not the main central hall where the main players were. It was at the far end where you catch taxi cabs on the third day. So by the third day, when people started catching taxi cabs, that's when our booth space picked up. But I looked like Exodus Global with their shear core products had a 10 by 10 booth with 2 products in it. And they had to have had like triple or quadruple the foot traffic than we did. I'm just like, what are they doing over there? And that was my first eye catching with Exodus Global. I joined NDA in 2019 when it was in Austin. I just clicked with them. I clicked with all of them. They knew I was a competitor, but I wasn't in that time. They knew what they had. And they were this group of people that were just genuinely having fun. I have fun at my job, but why are it more fun? And they just swooped me and Haley in like we were part of them. And it just felt good to be in that group. So that was my first exposure to the company. So Exodus Global is like the shear core shears, Fortress, Oil Quick coupler systems, Blade Core, which makes blades for all major brands of shears. And then they actually got Connect Work Tools. The hammer was originally distributed under Allied for 18 years. It was the AR series. And then Stanvik in Sweden was buying out Allied, their North American distributorship, and basically anything not made in Europe had to go. So after an 18-year partnership, the simple story is they sent MSB a letter like, hey, thanks for the good times, and we're out. So Exodus Global picked up the Connect tool line and knew people that worked for it. I'm very thankful for the company that I worked for before, because they let me do what I need. I brought them the idea of, hey, I know I've been in this for 3 years, but I'm thinking about opening up a 12,000 square foot distribution point rebuild facility. You want your hammers, and I'll just distribute it for you and become the Amazon. So I've got no quarrels about that. Long story short, the parent company went public, and I don't know. I felt like, not to downplay anybody's business decisions, there's advantages to going corporate, but it's just, I'm not a corporate person. So
Just a different set of obstacles to navigate, right? And you got to choose which ones you want to navigate and don't. And that's not navigating those that's not for everyone.
No, and I felt working for certain suppliers, they were making products for other markets, and then they were sending them to America for us to sell. Oh, what if we had this on there? And maybe not in the global market, but in America, that's what people want. And so I don't know, like I had my shop, I had 6 techs, a customer service advisor, a parts manager. There's harder ways to make money. Like I've got my guys. That's what my shop was basically the filter to make it as easy as possible for people to buy from us, whether it be financially or just turn and burn speed rebuilds. And then I was driving to work one Tuesday, and this guy named Rich Curry calls me, and I'd met Rich in the past. And hey, you recommended even to me by Terry Sturgill. Met you at NDA, and you guys hang out, and we've got an opening for a director of sales position, and wondering if you were interested. Man, I was like, I'd love to work for Exodus. Just seeing what you guys have done from the marketing standpoint, disruptor. It's a lot of like multi-level new skin and Amway.
Accurate description, huh?
Yeah. But I'm like, they were a disruptor in the industry. They came on the scene strong and came on fast. And I'm like, but I got my shop, I got my guys. Like, I don't see it working out. He's like, stay on the phone. So he talked to me for 30, 45 minutes and then teed up a trip for the owner, Murray Johnson, who ended up, slowly investing and buying out Exodus Global. And Kevin Boreen, our president, they came down and visited the shop. I'm like, man, my perception of that trip, I remember like Murray owned a bank in Chicago. I'm like, oh, here comes some Chicago banker going to come down to slow talking Texas and try to fix a little business guy. And it was not like that at all. And the short and sweet of it was hearing what you said about the product, rebuilding some of them and just seeing them come in like dog trash from some of these rental applications they've been in, but the internal guts were still holding up. But you guys can build shears and do everything you did up there. You can certainly support hammers. And they're like, yeah, we just want you to be a director of sales, do it your way. We'll move the entire division down to Texas. We'll buy your shop and hire all your guys. I was like, huh. So I threw the steering wheel out the window going 60. And everybody at Exodus is incredible to work with. And there's been bouts where change is tough. Everybody wants to do things the same way. And I've had struggles doing some conversions, and I get it. The company I worked with before did great support, and people were comfortable with the name and they stay with it. But there's just some struggles. People leave, people stay. I didn't exactly make it easy for the last couple years, but I did trust the program. I'm like, man, they've been through harder stuff up there before. Like what I'm sitting here kicking and screaming about compared to what they've done is nothing. So I've always trusted the program, and it takes a little while to dial stuff in, but man, I feel like moving forward with our manufacturer support, like we can call them and they'll make changes. There's not many manufacturers that will do that. And coupled with just the leadership team up at Exodus, I've never felt more empowered to win out there.
Something I want to hit on, your shop down there when you're independent had such a fun culture, right? That culture was just fun. Everybody was working hard, working together, but it was fun. I felt like just in my outside 10,000 foot view, maybe, Exodus seems like the same culture with a lot more people, right? Like it just seems like a lot of fun people, a lot of people you want to hang out with. It would be pretty hard. I feel like the leadership that I've met, it would be pretty hard to distinguish. They're so laid back and just down to earth. It seems, I feel like if you were to just walk up there, no name tags, and start talking, it would be pretty hard to figure out who the boss was, right? They're just very down to earth, very personable, really good people.
Murray loves to play the undercover boss card. He's the guy that wants to know about your feelings. This kind of conversation, like he never asked him, hey man, like what are you selling? He's like, hey, like how's the family? Like it is a very unique ownership style that just moves down. And what it is, there's a lot of people who gained a ton of industry experience in their previous past, but for whatever reason were at a company that was just so big or just have been doing it for so long, wouldn't change. So Brian Hahn, our vice president of sales, he had worked for this other company for 18, 20 years, and it's just, but the culture ground him down because it was corporate. And so he had such a wildly functional background. He came over here, like we're like the land of broken toys, but we knew what we wanted to do. And they're like, hey, everybody's opinion's welcome, and we'll actually talk about it and make changes. And Rich, my boss, Curry, he worked for Jewel for 10, 12 years. And man, when you're designing high reaches and just his sphere of influence and just the amount that he's grasped reminds me, like, and not to fluff your pillow because we're on the podcast, but reminds me a lot of you. Like I always forget that you're younger than me, But because you've been through so much and you've done so much and you learn so much through your experiences, like Rich, like he's such an underrated dude, but then he speaks. We're out drinking at the bar one night with customers, and like the next morning, 8 o'clock in the morning, rolling to the booth, and he whips out these financial statements and he's jousting with the financial companies we're talking to. It's like a whole lot like old school. Will Ferrell blacks out and gives us an amazing, but it's just such a laid back vibe. Man,
Yeah.
customer cruising through town yesterday in Superior where I was for a meeting, and he just called Brian. He's like, "Hey, any good spots to eat? Like, we're on the way to vacation." He's like, "Actually, our factory does breakfast every Thursday morning. Why don't you bring your family around there?" So during the factory breakfast that we sponsor every Thursday morning, his family came in. They gave him a tour around the shop. Like the kids weren't like pushed off to the side. They're involved. It's a unique experience, man. It's something different. And yeah, you're right. And that culture was what we bred at KGS before we converted over. Yeah, we had free beer Fridays, and that had to go away because there's
Had to make a few tweaks to the policies, maybe.
yeah, well, like, and there's benefits to joining a company like Exodus, but one of the and there's uh, downfalls, but it's more paperwork and accountability and tracking jobs, which like we weren't doing. This is how much the job costs. Like just get it done. And through that, a couple people had left because one started his own air conditioning business, one got his dream job. So it's no fault of Exodus. Things change, but for the bigger thing, we joined a bigger ship and had to tweak some of our programs. So the people we've got in place now, guy Chris Jenkins runs the production side. Hammers fly out of that shop so fast, and the amount of information I've got access to on a spreadsheet, I can tell you probably what time your hammer's going out and who it shipped with, and like without having to call in. And then Derek Young just took over as service manager, and he's been doing it for 8 or 9 years, and it just adds so much more organization to an already fun culture. It's definitely a program that's pretty formidable.
For me, and I know you're the same way, like we're both very passionate about what we do. We're passionate about the industry. And so it's enjoyable for us because it's enjoyable for us. But when you have a really well-oiled, or you feel like you have really strong support, you've got a really good team, because I've been on the business development side, you've been on the business development side. We're not selling a product most of the time. We're selling the people. We're selling the people that are supporting the product. And so when you feel really confident and you feel like you have, and they're doing things to make you feel like, hey, man, this thing is under control. If I've got information being fed to me, from these guys where I'm not having to call and beg for it, that gives you a different level of confidence as you're going out and representing them. Right. And so there's a lot of value to that, for sure. So that's exciting to me.
Spot of having the shop. I'll be honest, like it was hard for me to let go of some of that, but I couldn't. And that caused some struggle. But now, and I feel like if I send an email and off it goes, and I don't have to worry about it. And I'm like, okay, like my job is now just to go sell and tell people the good news that Connect Work Tools is here. If me and freight brokers are out there banging down the doors, I just make a joke that selling hammers is like being a freight broker. People know the product. Tanya Land is our corporate communications marketing director, and she has done such a wildly fantastic job for Connect, getting that name out, familiarizing it so fast. I don't feel like I'm selling a no-name product. I didn't at my other job. It took so much longer to get that out there. Like it's a program, man. And I've had people from the industry call and ask, "Hey, why'd competitors? Like, hey, why'd you go to Connect?" And I explained my thought process because I didn't want to go to a big monster company. That's how they do things. Like this is how we do it, and that's how it's always been done. Like Connect was like, hey, make it your way. And I feel like there's always a different way to do things.
Right. Man, my first interaction with Tanya was obviously through this podcast, but man, I can tell she's just very sharp, very experienced, and does a great job. Really does a great job.
Oh, she's phenomenal at shows. Wives love her. Customers love her. She gets an even deeper understanding. She is good at what she does.
Well, tell us, so what are you guys excited about? Obviously, the industry as a whole, we're experiencing a little bit of a slowdown. I think it has a lot to do with the election year, but What are you guys, what do you see on the horizon? What are you guys excited about?
First, the things that we're excited about is, and the downturn is not advantageous financially, but what it did allow us to do is slow down, hone in on our processes, and through this time, they actually did a joint venture with Oil Quick Sweden, where they're now manufacturing Oil Quick here in the States. They bought 9 robotic welders, 2 more milling and machining center machines. Quite a wild investment to the tune of somewhere around $20 million expansion factory with machining and prepping. And when you do that, it changes the whole flow of the shop, like pretty disruptively. The slowdowns allowed us to really fine tune, get leaner, get meaner, because the robotic welders aren't taking people's jobs because you can't find people to really weld anymore. It's taking
Right.
good welders and teaching them how to run the robotic welders. So when the robotic welders are doing that, they can go do something else. So trying to be as self-sufficient as that's a big exciting factor. The next for us is the expansion down in Cleburne, where we're going to go from a 12,000 square foot warehouse to around a 60,000 square foot warehouse. So that's exciting for us on our end.
That's got to, obviously, that has to be that's got to be personal to you as well. I know that it's Connect or Exodus owned now, but man, that was your baby. We obviously were talking about that earlier in the conversation, and now just seeing that continue to grow and expand, that's got to be so exciting.
But I've got a 3-year-old too, so we had a kid during this whole
Mixed in there.
But I mean, like, babies grow, and that's your job. As I could have kept, I couldn't have done much more with it. I mean, it's how much for everybody who's really got a big successful business, they've given up a ton of their personal lives to do it. Talking about other rental houses and stuff like that, going from a gas station to a 10, 12 location, $500,000 company, even watching some of our other bigger customer rental houses add 49% more locations. There's a lot of people giving up a lot of personal time. And at some point, you got to give it up to the bigger ship and let them help you. It was my baby, but I'm very glad that we've got a good co-parenting situation going on down there. And it's time. It's time to move on. I never would have built a 60,000 square foot warehouse. And so, yeah, it's, some people that don't let go get stuck in the past.
I know a few minutes ago we were talking about letting go of things when you're on the operational side, then you go to business development. I think both of us have shifted back and forth throughout our career a little bit. And I feel like it's a lot easier. I don't know if it's easier one way or the other to let go of the sales side or the operations side when you step out into one or the other once you've been exposed to both. But I can only imagine having that facility. But I know you've also got a great team down there, and I'm sure you feel very comfortable with the way they're running it. Obviously, they're doing well for you guys to be expanding like that. So that's really exciting.
No,
that's awesome.
It's a good ride. I would do it again for the first time, but I wouldn't do it again. I don't have the gumption to start, especially
not this late, huh?
We'll transition, I'm sure, into challenges, but it's the same. It's the workforce challenge. I got very lucky with my group of dudes because they all hung out, and I would rather take somebody green and teach them what they need to know because they possess the personality traits that you can't teach. Be a good person, work hard, take pride in your work. I hired Derek Young, then Chris Jenkins came on, and JP Downey, and then Ryan, and then Coy, his brother. Like, I basically pillaged that whole group. Hey, just like I want to take care of you guys, and you guys help take care of me. That has been exhausted. Like, you only have so many friends, and if they had other good friends, they had good jobs. But yeah, now trying to find people with that kind of drive is tough. It's across the country. It's just the culture of. It's a great idea to want to go work hard until you actually go out in the sun and start sweating. You're like, oh, this may be not for me.
I think your ability to train and develop people is one of your stronger suits too. And that's been really fun to watch some of those people come up through their careers. And not that long ago, you had brought one of your trips, you had brought a relatively, I forget his name, but brought a relatively young guy to dinner. And I was like, as soon as I met him, I was like, oh, this is definitely one of Geordie's guys. Definitely his type of guy that he likes to train. But they do well, and you've got a loyal following. Some of those people sprinkled out in other aspects of the industry, and most of them, I think, are still close to our businesses in some way.
For
So
sure.
pretty fun.
Those guys, the Midwest kid and Kiefer, I'm sorry I call them kids. They're 25, but man, like when
Feels
you
like it.
43 and a dad and you're working with 25-year-olds and like cultural jokes or movie lines don't land because they literally have no idea. I am now the old dude.
Yeah.
But I
It
mean,
happened fast too, right?
yeah, no kidding. It's just, oh man, like that was a good joke and you don't get it.
It feels like last year I was too young to get respect, and this year I'm the old guy.
Well, like Aaron O'Shaughnessy in the Midwest and Kiefer, they both started in the shipping department at the shop, but they were hired. And like I was talking with Kevin, our president, this week, and he's like, yeah, when I hired them, I knew you won't be in the shipping department long. And yeah, I mean, like Kiefer's done great out there. Aaron is the personality. Like I don't think Midwest folk, like my personality is a little bit too spicy for the Midwest. Got that West Coast vibe. Vaughn down there in the Southeast with his just decades of industry experience. He is the older than me guy. So it's weird working with somebody.
Nice to have one of those around.
Yeah, yeah. And so it's a very unique sales staff, but it's that same thing of Exodus grew these people because they knew them personally and then brought them into the business. They didn't per se find them in a random Indeed interview.
I appreciate you coming on so much, and always a pleasure sitting down and getting to talk with you. I feel like we don't get to do it enough these days, but it is really good having a conversation with you and hearing from you. Thanks for being on.
For sure, man. Thank you very much, too.
All right, brother. Well, have a good one. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you. Bye.